In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the recent Champions League game between Borussia Dortmund and PSG. Both teams lined up in a 3-4-3 formation, PSG changing from their usual shape in order to match up man-to-man with Borussia Dortmund. Let's first take a look at how PSG formed their shape during their attacking build-up phase. As you can see here, they kept their general 3-4-3 shape, with their three center backs staying deep behind the forward line of Borussia Dortmund, their two holding midfielders stepping in here, and then their wing backs pushing up to join the front three in between the midfield and defensive line of Borussia Dortmund. Borussia Dortmund played in a very zonal defensive system. This means that if the pass from PSG went wide, their whole defense shifted together. They weren't too concerned about putting a bunch of pressure on the ball when the back three were in possession. The double pivot of PSG were very static and just stayed in front of the midfield line, trying to help build up with the three center backs. Whenever one received the ball, Borussia Dortmund would act accordingly and shift in. Although both of PSG's holding midfielders are very good on the ball, their matchups are pretty tough, with Witsel and Emre Can both being bigger. So as PSG moved the ball around and shifted the ball from side to side, Borussia Dortmund shifted from side to side also, and their midfielders had a heavy focus on denying any passes in between them in the middle of the field. This meant that their four midfielders were very narrow, and it was very difficult for PSG to find any passes to their two playmakers, Neymar and Di Maria. Because he wasn't getting on the ball very much, Neymar then decided that the best option was to drop deep and try to receive the ball ahead of Dortmund's midfield line. This only caused more issues and crowded the midfield during the build-up even more for PSG. As you can see in the screenshot, Neymar has dropped in to receive the ball ahead of the Dortmund midfield line. Now there are 5 PSG players, not including the other holding midfielder from PSG, and all 5 of them are behind the first Dortmund player, Haaland, pressing the ball. This is a very ineffective way to try to build up the play, and my only reasoning that I could see PSG doing this was to make sure that they held onto the ball and kept it secure to prevent a lot of Dortmund counterattacks, as they were probably afraid of giving up too many goals in the first leg. So if we see Neymar with the ball here, Dortmund shift accordingly, and Neymar would just lay the ball off most of the time, not really progressing the ball any further forward. To make matters even worse, Di Maria felt the need to do the same thing on the other side and would drop in ahead of Dortmund's midfield line to try to receive the ball. As you can see in the screenshot, this leaves PSG heavily underloaded up front, with Mbappe being basically the only guy challenging the back line, with Meunier on the right side trying to stretch the back line. So now let's talk about some ways that PSG could have counteracted Dortmund's compact block in the middle. A good place to start might be how they scored their only goal of the game. Di Maria and Mbappe had switched spots, Di Maria taking up the central position, Mbappe a little bit out wide. As the ball got moved to his side, Mbappe checked out wide, but stayed behind the midfield line of Borussia Dortmund. He didn't check in front of them, making himself an obvious mark. So when he got the ball, it forced the Dortmund midfielder on this side to drop off and come backwards to defend him, as opposed to Mbappe receiving the ball, turning, and having a defender step up to him. This makes a big difference. The defender then is running backwards, and it's much easier to try to take him one-on-one, which Mbappe is very good at. We then saw this as Mbappe basically ran through the Dortmund defense, got a little bit of luck with Zagadou falling to the ground in a weird way, Neymar coming up with him, the pass across, and then Neymar finished the goal off. So starting from there, we can see maybe what would have been a better way for PSG to build up. Instead of Neymar or Di Maria dropping deep, trying to help the build up from ahead of Dortmund's midfield line, they could have stepped out a little bit wider, therefore leaving more space in the middle for the two holding midfielders to step into, or for another player to step into. One thing that was happening a lot was Piszczek, number 26 for Dortmund, was man-marking Neymar deep into midfield, tracking him back. So if Neymar, instead of staying central, would have stepped more wide, this would have left Piszczek in an interesting situation, because either he could follow Neymar wide, or he has to leave him. So now with Neymar and Di Maria wider, if PSG would play the ball out to the left, Now we're forcing 7 from Dortmund, which is Jadon Sancho, into a difficult situation. If Sancho steps, Kimpembe now has an easy pass out wide, and now we're in a 2v1 situation with Neymar, which is always a good place to be. Forcing the Dortmund right back, if he wants to step out, Neymar has space to run into, or the PSG left back has space to run in down the line. The reason this didn't happen during the game is with Neymar a lot more central, this 2v1 was basically a 2v2 because Piszczek found it very easy to man-mark Neymar. But if he starts a bit wider, then now PSG have 2 players going up against 1 Dortmund player. If you force the help from Piszczek out wide, this now opens the gap in between Piszczek and Hummels in the middle for Mbappe to run into. So now let's run through the second situation where Sancho doesn't pressure the ball. He drops off and tries to block the passes into either of the PSG players ahead of him. In this situation, it's pretty easy for Kimpembe to just take the ball himself and drive into the middle of the field. This now forces a Dortmund midfielder on this side, in this case Emre Can, to step out, and for the rest of the Dortmund midfielders to shuffle across. And now if the 2 holding midfielders from PSG shift into space, you can see that now Kimpembe has stepped up, so we still really have 2 holding midfielders here. Okay, the center backs have shifted across to help cover. But now if we get one of the holding midfielders step in behind the Dortmund midfield line, we are now covering across the entire field. This all just makes it harder for the 4 Dortmund midfielders to cover the gaps that they're trying to cover. Like I said in the game, they're very narrow, covering the gaps through the middle. Here now we have, if we can play across and across again, and now we're in a 2v1 out wide on this wing. Now let's take a look at what Dortmund did in their build-up phase. PSG clearly changed to a 3-4-3 formation in order to match up man for man with Dortmund. Here we can see that basically every white shirt has a man across from them that they're responsible for marking. Because of this, the build-up for Dortmund was very difficult, and they basically gave up on trying to build up if PSG applied any pressure. However, this worked out pretty well for them in the midfield because both of PSG's holding midfielders were very small in stature, especially compared to both Emre Can and Axel Witsel for Borussia Dortmund. So whenever the ball was played in the air towards one of the center midfielders, they basically would always win this header. The other downside to PSG's man-to-man marking scheme was that it required a very disciplined defense. Taking any risks on trying to win the ball were very dangerous. I mean, you could see this a couple of times throughout the game where a PSG midfielder went flying into a tackle and got beat that led to a Dortmund counterattacking chance. So say here we win the header and he gets flicked on to Jadon Sancho. PSG have to be very disciplined in staying with their marks. So what you would expect was Kimpembe would come up here and Kurzawa would really make sure that Hakimi doesn't get on the backside. However, Kurzawa seemed very lazy at times, and Hakimi took advantage and got played in down the right wing quite often. This created a couple of chances, especially in the first half for Dortmund. Dortmund are very good in the transitional phases of play. However, let's try to take a look at what they could have fixed to maybe be a bit better just in the build-up phase. The first thing they could have done was try to move around their players from their normal 3-4-3 shape in order to cause some confusion among the PSG defenders. One way of doing this would have just been to have flipped the front 3 from a triangle that's pointed forward to more of a triangle that has the point further back. So we see here now instead of 1 forward with 2 attacking midfielders, we have the attacking midfielder with 2 forwards. Now we essentially have 3 midfielders against PSG's 2 holding midfielders. So really in midfield, we should always have a free man in this situation. Going back to how Dortmund started, now let's see if there's another option maybe that we could shift into to disrupt more of PSG's pressing. Like I said before, PSG's pressing was effective because they were man-to-man all across the field. So if Dortmund were to shift shape, then it would be a lot harder for PSG to follow their man across the field while also still being in their attacking shape when PSG would win, if PSG would win the ball back. So one way would basically just to be to shift the line from a back 3 into a back 4. One way to do this would be to push one full back, shift the back 3 across, and then step the opposite wing back up the field. So if we try this here, this is how we shift across the field. We still hold our double pivot here in the middle. Okay, our back 4 now has formed from our back 3 plus a wing back added in. Our wingback on the left side, Guerrero, has stepped up the field to become the left winger. Jadon Sancho has stepped out wider to become the right winger. And Thorgan Hazard has stepped inside to become the attacking midfielder. So what this would allow, again, just like before, we have our free player in here. We have two players out wide, which would force Di Maria and Neymar to either stretch out wide or try to stay narrow. If PSG would just follow their marks from the 3-4-3 formation, it would look something like this. As you can see, we've had Marquinhos follow Hazard into the middle of the field. We've stretched Kimpembe out here. And now this is basically what the goal was. We have now found big spaces on the outsides of the central center back, Thiago Silva. So these are very easy spaces to exploit. You can just play a big ball in between to get a winger running onto it, or you can have a forward drop out into the space to run into. This shape is sort of similar to what happened on Dortmund's second goal. Here it was the subbed in Gio Reyna for Thorgan Hazard. But he drifted from the left side over to the right side. Hakimi dropped deep and a little deeper, and Sancho was out wide. So what happened was Kimpembe stepped out to Sancho. Marquinhos didn't want to track Reyna all the way across the field, so he stayed over here. And this basically left Reyna open, who then found Haaland isolated in a 1v1 up against Thiago Silva. And because he was in a 1v1, Thiago Silva didn't want to step up and put too much pressure and get beat, so he backed off and Haaland finished nicely. Overall, both teams struggled in their attacking build-up phase for different reasons. PSG was too cautious and left too many players deep to build up, and Dortmund were matched man for man and could not find a way to build out, so settled for hitting longer balls to their taller players and trying to play in the transitional phases. Thank you for watching. Please leave any feedback in the comments.